All right, let's talk about autism. But what if we've been looking at it all wrong? What if this thing we've always called a disorder is actually a sneak peek into the next stage of human evolution? It's a huge idea, I know. And today we're going to unpack this puzzle. The answer just might flip everything you thought you knew about the human mind on its head.
So let's just start with this one question, right? It kind of breaks all the rules of basic evolution. Think about it. Natural selection is supposed to favor traits that help us survive. So why does something like autism still exist? And not just exist, it actually seems to be more common. This isn't just a medical mystery, you guys. It's an evolutionary one. And the answer is pretty wild.
Okay, but before we get into the whole evolution thing, which is, a massive topic, we have to start somewhere smaller. We gotta look at the reality for families on the ground. For them, this whole thing doesn't start with some big abstract puzzle. It starts with something incredibly personal and honestly, kind of scary. Just trying to manage uncertainty.
And this quote from a parent it really hits home, doesn't it? Having a child with autism means constantly managing uncertainty. See, it's not just about juggling therapy appointments or sticking to a schedule. It's way deeper than that. It's about trying to navigate a world you can't fully grasp because you're trying to connect with your child who experiences everything, every sight, every sound, in a way that is completely different from you. And that constant uncertainty, it can be absolutely terrifying. I mean, just imagine it. You can't see the world through their eyes. You can't hear the sounds the way they hear them. So of course, that leads to this feeling of panic, of complete helplessness. You're trying so hard to guide your kid through a world that just wasn't built for them, and you can't even perceive it the same way they do. It's an impossible situation.
And all of this feeds into what you could call a panic cycle. It starts with this immense pressure. Parents are told you have a critical window from birth to age 5. That's it, don't waste it. So what happens? You've got this constant, frantic rush of therapies and interventions, and you end up adapting everything, your whole life, the furniture in your house, the shoes you buy, all of it, just to try and create an environment that works. It's just completely exhausting, an all-consuming reality. So how do you break a cycle like that? Well, it all starts with a huge shift in how we think about this. It's about moving away from seeing it as a disease and starting to see it as a difference. And this really lays it out perfectly, right? On one side, you have the disorder model. That's the one that says autism is an illness, a deficit, something broken that needs to be fixed. But then you have the diversity model, which completely reframes the whole thing. It says, hold on, this isn't an illness, it's just a different state of being. It's not a deficit, it's a different way of perceiving the world. The goal isn't to fix, it's to understand.
And that's the core idea behind this word you hear a lot now, neurodiversity. It's actually a pretty simple concept. Just like we have biodiversity in nature, all different kinds of plants and animals, we have neurodiversity in our brains. These differences in how we learn, pay attention, and think, they aren't flaws, they're just a natural and really valuable part of the human experience.
But it's one thing to say a different perception, but what does that actually feel like? Well, someone actually tried a VR headset that simulates an autistic experience, and they said it was just, wow. The sound was totally overwhelming. Their vision narrowed down to this one intense little point, and then just pure panic. That's a lesson you can't get from a textbook, right? And that sensory difference has huge, real-world consequences. There's this story about a mom who just could not understand why her son was so terrified of the metro. It made no sense to her. Then, one day she's on the train, and the noise is so deafeningly loud she can't even hear her own audiobook with the volume cranked all the way up. And in that one moment, she got it. For the first time, she felt just a tiny fraction of the sensory assault he must feel every single time. So all of this leads to an even bigger idea. Maybe, just maybe, the problem isn't the person's brain at all. Maybe the real problem is our society's incredibly rigid, narrow idea of what a normal brain is supposed to be. And that perspective really challenges a fear a lot of parents have, right? The worry about having an abnormal child in their kid's classroom. But check out this question. Are you aware of what a great blessing it is to have an abnormal child in your class? Whoa, what if it's not a problem, but a blessing? That one question just flips the whole script. Because think about it, having a classmate who sees the world differently is maybe one of the best educational experiences a kid can have. It teaches them to be socially flexible, it builds real, genuine empathy, and it makes them more resilient. It basically prepares them for the real world, a world that is messy and diverse and definitely not one size fits all. So,
When you get right down to it, the problem isn't the individual. It's our obsession with this single, narrow definition of what's normal. That's the real issue. Our society's obsession with conformity is what creates the disability in the first place.
And this brings us all the way back to where we started, that big evolutionary puzzle. What if this rise in neurodiversity isn't a problem we need to solve? What if it's a pattern we need to understand? A clue, maybe, to where we're all headed next?
Now this is the really provocative part. We hear about the increasing rate of autism diagnoses, and it's always framed as a crisis. But what if it's not? What if it's actually a sign of adaptation?
Just look at this timeline. It lays the problem out so clearly. On the one hand, you have biological evolution. We're talking thousands of years for any meaningful change. Then there's cultural evolution, which is faster, hundreds of years. But then look at technological evolution. It changes everything in like a decade. There's this huge, massive mismatch, and it's only getting bigger.
Basically, our biological hardware is ancient, and it just can't keep up with the super fast software of the world we've built. So here's the theory. Is it possible that a new kind of human mind is emerging to cope? A mind that's wired differently to handle this new, hyper-complex world we've created?
And if that's even a remote possibility, then it changes everything. It means we have to stop trying to fix people who are different and start embracing the unique strengths they bring to the table.
And these differences really do come with some incredible strengths. We're talking about intense, sustained focus, a superior ability to recognize patterns, thriving on routine and repetition. Now think about the world we live in. It's all about complex systems and massive amounts of data. In that world, those aren't deficits. They're basically superpowers. It's no surprise that cutting-edge fields like software and even national defense are actively recruiting people with these exact skills.
And look, this isn't some tiny niche thing we're talking about. The latest estimates suggest that pretty soon it could be as many as 1 in 30 kids identified with autism. This isn't a small group of people to be managed anymore. This is a huge and growing part of our shared human future.
So, what do we do with all this? How do we move forward? Well, there's this really beautiful quote that I think says it all. If this is the sound of footsteps, then treat the new, well, polish the new. Our job isn't to fight what's coming, it's to welcome it and help it shine.
So I'm going to leave you with one last question to think about. What if the whole goal was never for us all to be normal? What if our future, our strength, our resilience, maybe even our survival, what if it all depends on us learning how to be brilliantly, wonderfully different together?